Happy New Year's Eve. There was a little comment there about not going on until it's actually the new year. We will absolutely not be going on until it's actually the new year. Except, let me have a look. If there's a country that, well, there will be a country, there'll be several countries that will be coming up to the new year during this stream, in which case, yeah, Happy New Year. But we will not be going on until it's New Year in the UK. There's a mention of badgers here. Lots of badgers. I will say I introduced the badgers. I have been a fan of badgers for a very long time. I have badger slippers and everything. Did you know that? They're lovely animals. They're much maligned. I think that's another thing why a lot of people will like badgers, because farmers don't particularly like them, but they don't really do anyone any harm, and yet they are treated very cruelly. But there it is. So yes, we can have a little bit of a discussion, a little bit of a retrospective of 2024. So some people had asked about predictions for 2025, and I thought, don't be ridiculous. I'm not doing that again. However, I noticed Rob Ford had a go at it, who, for those who don't know, is an academic. So they're not the most stunning predictions, it has to be said. They're not really far out there, but there were a few in there where I thought, well, I can add my own thoughts to that. So I'll do a little video tomorrow on some of the things I think will or won't happen in terms of politics in 2025, although a lot of it, there'll be a lot of caveats in there because I can't read the future. But there we go. And they're saying I like badgers too. Almost everyone likes badgers. Some farmers of livestock don't like badgers, but farmers of livestock don't like a lot of animals. Actually, farmers in general, crops or livestock, don't like a lot of wildlife. Apart from bees. Bees are good. And, one I suppose, notable event we've had this year is we've got a government that is actually going to do something to make sure we don't carry on killing all the bees, because they're fairly important. But in terms of that, we could jump there saying my prediction for 2025, it'll be warmer than 2024. I'm sort of, I'm thinking mainly political. Unless you think the political heat is going to be greater, I don't know. So in terms of notable events, I mean, there's obviously a lot of them. It's been a big one. And again, you can talk about whatever you want, but I'm thinking mostly in terms of British politics. What are some of the... someone just said there, do you think Stan might offer Trump a knighthood to pacify him? No, he is offering him another state visit, though. I believe that Trump is coming. I don't know when. I haven't bothered reading it. But I gather he is going to get another state visit. So he gets to have a posh dinner at Buckingham Palace, where Charles won't be able to ignore him this time. He hid from him last time. It was hilarious to watch when Trump came for a state visit last time. Absolutely hilarious. Charles was hiding. Didn't want anything to do with him. He's stuck now. He's got to be the host. But yes, the notable event. I mean, obviously we had a general election. That was a fairly important event this year. It would have been an important event in any year when we had a general election, but it actually did result in a change of government. So yeah, taxation is something that's going to it has dictated a lot of the narrative all the way through the year. Remember, we started off it's not just about the Labour budget. We started off 2024 with the Conservatives, before even the budget, before spring, putting in place a cut to employees' national insurance, which, I remember thinking I was getting things wrong, because in 2023, late 2023, I'd been reading about, various economists saying, well, there's no real room for tax cuts. Where's he going to get tax cuts from in the election year? And then they announced these tax cuts, and you think, well, has the economy done better than we thought? Because I didn't think it had. If you recall, we started 2024 in a recession. So there's me thinking, how the hell have they done this? And I knew that Jeremy Hunt was not like Kwasi Kwarteng. He was going to produce an OBR report with his budget. So there were two things with that initial tax cut January this year. The first of which was, and I said at the time, this surely, and I was still convinced we were going to have a May general election. I put money on it because I thought, Why would you have like, so if you're going to cut taxes, you just do it in the budget, don't you? So we have a budget in March, and then the budget comes online in April. If you're actually going to have an autumn general election, then that's enough. I mean, obviously, if you're going to cut taxes just before an election, you want time for it to filter through. Sure, okay. People might not notice it if you have an election in May, but if you're going to have it in autumn, they'll have noticed. So why would you have to why rush to do it in January? And, you know, when you have to apply some specific legislation to make it happen, why would you do that? It can only be because you plan on having a general election in the first half of the year, which we did, but not as early as I thought. And then the second thing I was thinking to myself is how are they doing this? And then we found out later on they did it by lying to the OBR. You know, they didn't give them all the right data. So they couldn't afford it. They actually couldn't afford the tax cuts. They basically just lied. And there's no, you know, if it had been Labour that had pulled that trick, it would have been all over the papers. They'd have never gotten away with it. Everyone in the country would know about it. Whereas in reality, almost no one knows about it. Amy, they're saying, hi, Phil, care to comment on what Labour's problem with trans people is? Are they just woefully misinformed, or is there some malice on the front bench? And if so, is it not just streeting? So, yeah, it's a very good question. So if I come at that historically and I'll try and do it as quickly, as concisely as I can. So I would say the key point came in 2023. Up until 2023, do you know what? I don't think there was any major cause for concern where Labour were concerned. I think there were a couple of triggers, and I really don't know how we got from A to B, but there were a couple of triggers in 2023. The first of which was the Scottish Gender Recognition Bill. I'm trying to think of the name of it then. The Gender Recognition Bill, which I'll remind people had cross-party support in Scotland. And I mean, there were a majority of Conservative MSPs voted against it, but there were some Conservative MSPs voted for it. All Labour MSPs voted for it. So the only dissenters really were most Conservative MSPs and some, even SNP. So there was some in the SNP who voted against it, right? But it had cross-party support. However, the problem was it was outside their area of competence. Now, the SNP really should have been more careful here. They've not done trans people any favours, although they have not at least acted maliciously. But they've not done themselves any favours passing that bill without making absolutely certain they could. It turned out they couldn't. And so Rishi Sunak was able to make a big thing of it, right? So that was one notable event. And because of it, and because at roughly the same time, there was that issue of that trans person in prison, wasn't there? And there just came a point where the public opinion on that particular trans issue sort of turned. And then the other one was pretty much at the same time. Labour lost the when Boris Johnson stepped down. I've forgotten the name of his bloody seat now. Doesn't matter. The seat he had, South Ruislip and something. Uxbridge and South Ruislip, or Uxbridge and Ruislip, whatever. So Labour lost that narrowly when they'd expected to win it. And I just sensed a bit of panic from Labour. I think they just panicked. And that is the point at which there seemed to be this little shift then. But in terms of what's causing it, I do think it's misinformation. There are, you know, like if you think about before 2020, before that point halfway through 2023, if you looked at transphobia in the Labour Party, it was basically Rosie Duffield. I'm not going to swear you might not be able to name one or two Labour MPs, but there was no one notable other than Rosie Duffield. And then all of a sudden, yes, there was a little bit of a switch. Now, I am going to say, although there are promises in the manifesto to improve some things for trans people, but I agree it's not good enough, particularly with, streeting's behaviour. But I really couldn't tell you. I'd be very surprised if it's real transphobia, especially in cabinet. Just because if that were the case, why was there that switch? Why weren't they always a bit off on trans issues? Why did it take that little switch? So I think it's probably a combination of misinformation and a fear that the issue is a bigger, political issue than it really is. But anyway, I honestly couldn't tell you. It is one of the things that has disappointed me most about Labour, really, in the last year or so. Brad W, £5 super chat, thank you very much. Says, according to BBC's QI, I've watched that for years. I don't watch television anymore, you see. All of modern Europe has descended from 8th century ruler Charlemagne. In 200 years' time, the same will apply for Boris Johnson. But, well, it sort of does. It sort of does, because inevitably, people get about, which is a good thing, hybrid vigour and all that. So people do get about. Yeah, so there is a very good chance, you're right, in a couple hundred years' time, everyone will be descended from Boris Johnson. Sorry. Not all of his genes will be crap. But there we go. Unquiet Badger there saying, congratulations on another 1,000 subs since reaching 200,000. Yes, thank you. It's, it'll not race up. It really won't race. I mean, my subscriber growth has been quite low it's probably round about where it should be now. It's not gonna push on to like 500,000 or anything. But interestingly, over Christmas, there have been more. I think more people have been watching YouTube over Christmas. Despite the fact that overall, as I say, since late August, views are down. Just because, we know a lot of people are turned off from politics now. I wonder if it's just people over Christmas watching a bit more, or is it now people have had their break and are going to come back? We will see. I don't know. Ivan there saying Wes Streeting is treating me like a human being, unlike his Tory predecessor. Oh yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Wes Streeting's evil or anything, and I do think I don't know him, and I've not been party to any discussions on the issue with the Cash report, for example. So I think it's much more likely to be misinformation rather than malice. I don't think it's malice. But at the same time, it really doesn't matter, does it? If someone does something that's harmful to a group of people, they're doing something that's harmful to a group of people. It doesn't matter if someone drops a piano on your head by accident or deliberately, you're still squashed. So I certainly don't expect trans people or people who are close to trans people to look at the manifesto and go, oh, well, there's a couple of things here that are a little bit better and feel that it's all right, because it's not. It's not good enough. Craig there saying, yes, Uxbridge and South Ruislip, not sure how I feel about Boris Johnson never seeming to stick in the same seat for more than one election. Well, I mean, see, he could actually, normally I wouldn't have welcomed him entering Parliament, because yeah, he was a Henley. When he first entered Parliament, it was Henley, and then he went off to be Mayor of London, came back Uxbridge. So yeah, it's whereas the next time, if he tries coming back to Parliament in the next few years, I don't want to tempt fate here, but it could end up being a benefit, because it will just I don't know, it could shake things up a little bit in the Conservative Party, but we will see. Because I'll tell you one thing. I mean, one thing Rob Ford did say in terms of his predictions is, because he was asked a load of questions by his followers, and one of them was about changes of leadership, and he's sort of suggesting, I think he's probably right, there's not likely to be a change of political leadership in the next year amongst the major parties. You can't really see it. I mean, if you think about it, so I mean, a lot of people are trying to shit stir with Starmer because of unpopularity, and his popularity may go down further next year if he doesn't get a bit better at the politics. But I mean, he's just won a massive election, and I said this before. If you look at Boris Johnson, so Boris Johnson won this big majority, nowhere near as big as Starmer's, and if you remember the time when between it was It was between late 2021 when Partygate was in full flow and they were losing safe seats. Remember, they lost, and I've forgotten where it was now, North Shropshire or something, wasn't it? Where the Conservatives lost a really safe by-election. This is like one of the safest seats in the country, and they lost it to the Lib Dems, which wasn't as embarrassing as losing it to Labour, but still, they lost a seat that had been Conservative for like 200 years, right? And at that point, it was quite clear that Boris Johnson had lost the public, and yet he still clung on. It took another 6 months before he resigned, and then another few months after that before he actually went. People had babies in the time it took for him to get gone. And it's... and you think, well, why was that? Why was that? And partly it was because there was no one obvious to take over. And the other reason is that Boris Johnson garnered a lot of loyalty because as far as a lot of Conservative MPs were concerned, they would not have won their seats without him. Starmer's in exactly the same position. There are a crap load. There's like over 200 Labour MPs who will have... They know what the situation was in 2019. Labour were left with like 200 seats. Most people did not believe they were coming back, and then they did. So he's going to have an awful lot of loyalty from that point of view. But also, again, no one obvious. I mean, I would say Labour have got better options than the Conservatives had, but there's no one obvious. There's no one obviously better. I mean, if there were, I'm ruthless. People describe Starmer as ruthless. Bollocks. I am absolutely ruthless with it. As far as I'm concerned, Labour should have the best placed people to win elections. And if I thought there was someone better, then I will be one of the first to say that Starmer should be going, but not yet. That'd be ridiculous. Alec, £2 super chat, thank you very much. Says, you're thinking of Cheshire and Amersham film? No, I'm not. No, that was the summer of 2021. No, I mean December 2021. This was much safer than Cheshire and Amersham. I'm pretty sure it was North Shropshire. And it was somewhere in Shropshire anyway. And that's... See, the Cheshire and Amersham should have got Conservatives thinking more than it did. It should have had them thinking, because the reason they lost that, this was before Partygate, it was even before the pollution scandal, it was before the Owen Paterson scandal, it was at the end of the vaccine ban, so the Conservatives were still doing all right. The reason they lost that one, and this is something Conservatives have never come to terms with, is that coalition that they won in 2019, where you had your traditional Conservatives and then you had the so-called Red Wall, former Labour strongholds. The reason the Conservatives were able to forge that coalition was down to a number of factors they were not going to replicate in the next election. And they've never really understood that. And part of the problem was they have... you say Darren James will be miles better. We don't know that yet. Let's give him a few years. Part of the problem... Because I'm going to say this on the issue of leaderships, because I've learnt my lesson from Ed Miliband. Like, I thought he'd be all right, and he wasn't. The overriding priority has to be strategic. They've got to be utterly focused on strategy of winning elections. That's their top job. Like I've always said on this channel, in opposition, the Labour leader has one job: to form a government, to win an election. Now, in power, they've got a lot of jobs, because they also have to bring improvements to as many people as possible, and as ingrained as possible. But the top job is still winning the next election. That never drops down in priority. And for example, when you look at some names that are mentioned now and then, like Lisa Nandy, I think... See, like Lisa Nandy and Angela Rayner are interesting. So Angela Rayner, I worry that she's like that sort of Neil Kinnock Marmite thing. Not because she's ginger, but because, there's a lot of people really like her, and then there's other people that are put off by her. Is she too Marmite? Whereas Lisa Nandy, I think, would probably have wider appeal. I think she's very good in debate. She's very good on like panel shows and stuff like that, like Question Time and stuff. She's always good on Question Time. But she's not very strategic. And for me, where she really let herself down was the issue over Partygate. Lisa Nandy apparently thought Keir Starmer was wasting his time. And it's like, when you look back at it now, he completely destroyed the Conservatives over it because it utterly destroyed Boris Johnson's reputation. And that wouldn't have happened just because of the reporting. That required that Privileges Committee investigation, which required Boris Johnson to be trapped in lies. Lies that really hurt the public as well. So, you know, if he hadn't persisted with that, if it had been, in other words, if Lisa Nandy had been the Labour leader at the time, what would have happened since? Would Labour be in power now? Much less likely. Ivan Ambrose there, 9.99. Thank you. It says, in 2025, Labour have got to lift the lid off uncertainty with regards to people with disabilities. We need to know what's going on. How this has been handled is not good enough. Well, I mean, there's good news and bad news there. The good, actually, it's good and bad news at the same time, I suppose. Maybe, we don't know. But obviously, they are going to announce what they're going to do, aren't they? That is coming in spring, I think. So there is going to be an announcement. See, what's happened is, and it is, you know, and I'll tell you where I think Labour have gone wrong. It's not that they've gone wrong in not saying exactly what they're going to do, because you can't do that until you know. And Liz Kendall couldn't really say anything for definite. Like, the first thing that had to happen is they had to win power. The second thing that had to happen is they had to find out exactly what's going, because they don't know exactly what's going on behind closed doors, behind the scenes, in the secret documents and so on. So they needed to find out what is actually happening in terms of the finances, in terms of just the Department for Work and Pensions. Then you need the budget, so Liz Kendall needs to know what money she's got. And then what she needs to do, and this is what she's doing at the moment, she's then trying to work out how to allocate that funding. Because when Rachel Reeves gives pots of money to cabinet ministers for their departments, there's a lot of freedom in how they spend it. There's not absolute freedom because the budget contained certain pots of money, ring-fenced, but by and large there's a lot of freedom. So Liz Kendall now has to work out how to do that without a generous settlement for her department. But at the same time, I'll tell you what, where I do think Labour have gone wrong. They should have set out their red lines. They're quite happy to have red lines on things like Brexit, you notice. So where were the red lines here? Because the issue is, Labour have said they're going to make savings, like, you know, in terms of the benefit system, right? So when the Conservatives say that, what they mean is they're going to reduce benefits. So people inevitably think, does that mean Labour are going to reduce benefits? Well, it could well be that actually what Labour are saying is, no, we don't think as many people are going to be on benefits over the next few years because of the work we're doing, and not by randomly sanctioning people, but, you know, naturally they think there will be fewer. And it could just be as simple as that. But it is always but you know, the fact that they weren't saying some, like, you know, Liz Kendall and Keir Starmer have both said, yes, there are people who can't work. You know, they have said that. The Tories never say things like that. You know, both Keir Starmer and Liz Kendall have said, yeah, there are people who cannot work. But that's not really enough. That's just little aside that's not really reported on much. So we will have to see. Do I think the government needs to be more active, need to take a more active role in sorting out the abuse scandals of the Church of England? Not so much the government. Maybe you just need an independent commission. I mean, I don't think the government should do it, but I think probably someone should do it. You know, it's like anything, isn't it? You know, when you've got like a sector or a group or an organisation or something, it's like, look, this thing happened. Can you sort yourselves out, please? And if they don't sort themselves out, then it's time to say, right, well, we need an outsider to sort it. So probably there ought to be some sort of commission. But I strongly suspect there's not going to be. Again, if you think about the massive list of things that Labour need to deal with, it's absolutely enormous. And what they will do if they're going to carry on being strategic is they're going to focus on the ones that will be noticed by the most particularly key voters. And the people are talking about music now for some reason. We ended up on the sort of stream yesterday, which is just for like the upper tier of members. We ended up talking about sport a lot, but I'm afraid I'm of no use to you when it comes to music. I know nothing about it. Will there saying Happy New Year, Phil. Here's to another year of Badenoch incompetence if she lasts that long. And I think she will. I mean, going back, I think went off on a tangent. Rob Ford was suggesting, yeah, all the party leaders will probably be still here in a year's time. And I think so. So if you look, there's no one agitating to get rid of Badenoch just yet. There are definitely going to be Tories who want her gone, but I think they recognise they have to give her enough rope. They also, I think, know that it just makes, at the moment, the Conservative Party are under a lot of pressure from Reform UK. A lot of it is self-inflicted. They're under a lot of pressure from Reform UK. They are worried that Reform UK persuade voters that they are the emerging power on the right. If the Conservatives start chopping and changing leaders on a regular basis again, they are going to look ridiculous. So unless Kemi Badenoch does something absolutely insane to crash their popularity, then she is almost certainly still going to be the leader in a year's time. You know, and I'll a few reasons for this. First of all, whatever she does and says is less damaging in opposition than it is in government. Because in government, it translates into a policy. And as Liz Truss showed, even before you've implemented the policy, as soon as you've announced it, it causes a cascade. It causes a reaction in the markets or from other groups or whatever. It causes a reaction that has real world consequences. Whereas Kemi Badenoch now, so she's in opposition. So when she says a thing, it's not government policy. But also, we are years away from a general election, so it can't become policy for years. And also, at the moment, no one really believes she's going to win the election in 4 or 5 years' time anyway. So, Kemi Badenoch, it would be very difficult to imagine her saying anything within that she's likely to say that would cause the Conservatives to panic and get rid of her sooner rather than later. Then the other thing is what Rob Ford had suggested. He thinks that Labour have got the capacity to do even worse in the polls next year. Now, I'm not going to disagree with him, but I would just add to something he said in that. So he bases it on the idea that what Labour are putting in place, you're not going to see the impact for some time. And that is true. And I've said myself, like, the budget doesn't get implemented until April. The legislation is still going through the House of Commons. It hasn't even got to the House of Lords, a lot of it yet. So their major legislation is still taking time to go through. And as Ford says, once the legislation's passed, there's then a period of time before it has an effect. And then when it has an effect, there's a period of time before people notice. And then when people notice, there's a period of time before they realise it's down to what the government did. So, yeah, this is why I keep saying it could be 2 or even 3 years before people start to realise that Labour have actually improved things. It can take that long. So, Ford is absolutely right to say that Labour have the capacity to go lower in the polls still, because they've not reached their floor at all. But what I would say is, a lot of their unpopularity right now, some of it is down to what he says, which is impatience on the part of voters. Absolutely. And of course, some of it is going to be down to the Tory media. He doesn't say that, but I'll say it. It's down to the Tory media, and that's always going to be the case as well. But I would also say that a fair amount of it is down to the way Labour decided to communicate with the public. I think it's on them. And I think if they improve that communication, then they have the capacity to arrest the decline in the polls. So I don't think it's certain that Labour finish next year worse than they are now. It is possible, but I don't think it's certain, because they can, although they cannot deliver a lot of tangible stuff in the next year, they can deliver a better message. Anyway, Alec Brett there, £5 super chat, thank you. It says, If Labour want to win big in Holyrood in 2026, Labour need to implement nodal wholesale electricity pricing. 12p off kilowatt hour price of a Scot should help. He's suggesting they bribe the public. I mean, yes, obviously, anything that they can do to reduce the cost of living that will be attached to the National Labour government, not the Scottish SNP government, would help, yes. I can well appreciate that Scottish Labour might be getting a bit frustrated at the moment at the way Starmer is being so cavalier about popularity. Like, it's a double-edged sword. Like, people keep saying about Keir Starmer, he just views the media nonsense as noise. And it's like, it's quite good, because it's never good to have senior politicians, especially the Prime Minister, because there have been Prime Ministers in the past who every morning go through what the papers are saying, what the headlines are saying. And it's almost like it, so then it allows them to base their strategy on what the papers are saying. So I'm all for having a Prime Minister that doesn't do that. But at the same time, you still have to be mindful about what the public are thinking. I'm totally fine with ignoring the news when they're talking nonsense. But the public listen and read the news, and their views are partly determined by what they say. So you need to be, in tune with that. And I approve of the fact that he's not getting sidetracked by how the media are describing what he's doing, but he should keep in touch with the public, and he's not doing. And he can bypass the mainstream media. I keep saying he's got the opportunity. If he wants, he can bypass the mainstream media. He's got social media. If he would just hire someone who knows how it works. Pronator, they're saying she could say, I'm making Truss my new shadow chancellor and Bojo my ethics advisor, and we'll see how the public react to her. So yeah, that's just why I say in terms of what she's likely to say. So Badenoch, this is why I keep saying Labour should actually use that line. Labour should, and I've said this for a long time, they should claim that the Tories want to bring back both Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, and if they win the election, because, say they know they can't win the election with those two in senior positions, but if they win the election, whoever's the leader at the time will be elbowed out the way, and they'll make Boris Johnson the Prime Minister again and Liz Truss the Chancellor. Just say it, claim it, because they won't deny it. They won't. First of all, it's believable. It is believable. And second of all, there's a lot of Conservatives that would quite like that. Ivan Ambrose, £5 super chat, thank you. It says, the question is, when will Labour get the right people to sort out their comms? Well, will they even? It's not guaranteed they will. My only real hope at the moment is, again, everyone who has anything to do with Starmer always says how ruthlessly focused he is on delivering. When he realises there's a problem, he does change things very quickly. And indeed he did do. He did do this summer. Just I don't think the changes were the right changes, that's all. So I don't think he will allow a problem to fester. At the same time, I wouldn't expect him to keep making knee-jerk reactions either. That'll just look chaotic. But so what I would expect is, if in the next 2 years, if the communication's not improving, I would expect him to do something. It's just, will he make the right decisions then? We will have to wait and see. Viv there saying another live Phil I've missed. Sorry, yes, it's because of the festive season, everything's up in the air. But we're back to normal from next week. You say Labour aren't going to improve the benefit system, they're going to impose Tory cuts. I don't think so. I'm not suggesting that when they announce what they are going to do, everyone will think, oh, well, this is all fine. Because that is not going to be the case. We know that the budget is squeezed, but it is not. They're not going to do what the Conservatives. If they were even thinking of doing, if they were even thinking of doing what the Conservatives were, because remember the Conservatives were very specific about what they were going to do. Labour blocks those plans. They stops it, and then until they've held their review. Labour wouldn't have done that if they were just going to do the same thing, because again, think about Starmer's whole strategy, and he's been quite open about this as well. get the unpopular stuff out of the way first. Just ram it all out. That to me is what they've done in this first half of year. All the unpopular stuff they've gone out of the way. So if they could easily have just the Conservatives already had plans. They could easily have just allowed those plans to go, and then they still could have tweaked them next year after their review, but they didn't. They specifically blocked them. And although I don't want to give anyone false hope, it doesn't make sense that they would do that if they were thinking even along similar lines. But I'm not going to claim that it's all going to be marvellous either, because they are still going to deliver effectively the same funding, as in the money, the physical money. But there is a difference. Again, if you're going to... The Conservatives keep increasing... Think about it this way. The Conservatives increase the number... Conservative governments increase the number of people who need benefits because they squeeze incomes and they reduce, decent job opportunities. They always boast about how low unemployment is. But that's because they class people as employed if they've got crap jobs that don't actually pay enough to live. Whereas you could argue with a better system, you would have fewer people in need of benefits, at which point the same pot of money can then be used. You don't have to then cut the amount an individual gets. But, I mean, we will see. We'll see in a few months' time. James Wigg 999 super chat, thank you. It says Labour might as well follow Henry II and merge the offices of Chancellor of the Exchequer and Archbishop of Canterbury. No. In fact, they'll be going all together soon. Remember, Starmer is after, and it's in the manifesto, so it's not happening this Parliament, but he's wanting it to happen fairly quickly. Before it's quite clear, Starmer wants to do this before he stops being Labour leader. And think about it this way: he's 61. He's not planning on going as long as Tony Blair or Margaret Thatcher went. I mean, he's not going to want to be Prime Minister in his 70s. So you would think one of the early jobs in the next Parliament, assuming everything goes his way, is the abolition of the House of Lords, or the unelected nature of the House of Lords. At which point all the bishops, they're still bishops, of course, but they will not have any part in the legislature. So there won't be any part of government at that point. John Hart, £5, thank you. It says, one big surprise of 2024 was Ukraine going on the offensive in Kursk. Apparently another one is planned in the south of Ukraine. Well, I mean, first of all, they found that they were able to do a lot more without necessarily telling the allies exactly what they were doing, because it had a habit of leaking to the Kremlin. But also... yeah, I mean, it's out of necessity, really, isn't it? It's out of necessity. They don't know how Donald Trump's going to behave. And even if Donald Trump carries on funding them for a little bit, he could stop it at any moment, couldn't he? He's very... Donald Trump doesn't care about Ukraine. He doesn't care about Russia either. He doesn't care about anything apart from himself. So he's far too volatile an ally to have. So Ukraine will need to make sure that they are very, very focused. And I'm sure they are. But anyway, well, let's get rid of that. Let's have a look at some winners and losers. Now, we'll do the winners first, nice and positive. There are actually several political winners, I would say, this year. There's several... It was quite an interesting election. It threw up a lot of different winners and losers. But I'm going to go... Obviously, Keir Starmer has to be a big one, despite, the position he finds himself in now. Like he says himself, and it's absolutely right, it's better to be in government, because you can then change things. So it doesn't matter what people think would happen in a general election in 4 or 5 years' time. He is in a position to change it. Whereas, for example, the Conservatives, if you look at the Conservatives, their reputation, there's not a lot they can do to rescue it other than hope that Labour implode. Like, if Labour carry on being this unpopular for the whole Parliament, okay, but that's all the Conservatives can do. I mean, I would suggest they will start the process better by at least apologising to the public for at least what the public blame them for. But yeah, but I would also say, obviously, in terms of other winners, I mean, you could say Jeremy Corbyn, because he now gets to be an MP without having to even pretend to follow the party whip. Not that he did a very good job of pretending anyway. And it may well be that some of the Labour MPs who lost the whip that are allies of his may join him. But Nigel Farage, and I would say Lee Anderson. I would say Lee Anderson is one of the biggest political winners of this year because he's come from like a really, like an average income. He had basically an average income living in the North Midlands. He suddenly found himself being an MP, but being paid several times the average, the median income. And then he gets his gig. Does he still have his job on GB News? I haven't kept up. I haven't heard that he got sacked. But I can't believe, with all the sackings there have been recently, that he'd keep his job. Does anyone actually know? I'm going to have to look it up. But if he still has his GB News gig, then he's on loads of money compared with where he was. So he will be absolutely thinking he's got his life O'Reilly. And he may imagine that he can carry on being an MP for a good long time yet. And then, although he started late, I mean, you only have to... If you're an MP for about 20 years, it's not a bad pension either, you know. It's not a bad pension. Plus, he'll have his miners' pension on top of it. But anyway. So people aren't blaming the Tories, though. It's amazing. I think they are. I think what a lot of people are doing is they're just largely ignoring the Tories at the moment because the focus is on Labour are now in government. So they're the natural focus. Ordinarily, you would think the Conservatives were second on people's minds because they're the alternative to government. But, you know, Reform UK really are. A lot of people... Because remember, a lot of people won't necessarily understand... They don't even understand how elections work. Really. And you see it all the time. If ever, like, an MP, like... defects from the party and everyone will go, oh, there should be a by-election. It's like, no, you don't vote for the party, you vote for the... I mean, you might think you do. I mean, I do. But what you're actually voting for is a candidate. You're voting for an MP. And, you know, people don't actually get how this system works either. So when Reform UK point out they got like 4 million votes, like 14% of the votes, but only got 5 seats, there's a lot of people go, oh, that's disgusting, which it is. But it's like, some people, like I go, well, that's wrong because it means some people's votes are more valuable than others, because I understand it. But there's a lot of people surprised by it. It's like they don't understand how it's possible because they don't understand the system. So these same people, I'm not having a pop at them, by the way, because I totally understand why people wouldn't want to be interested in politics. It's horrible. But these same people would be could easily be convinced, I think, that Reform UK could be in a better position than the Conservatives at the next election. Now, I don't think they will be, but I could understand how some voters will think that, and maybe a lot of voters. So this might be controversial, but I can see why the average voter likes Lee Anderson is the right-wing John Prescott. Well, yeah, that is honest. That's not controversial at all. That is how they'll see him. They'll see him as this straight-talking guy. Oh, he says it as it is, and it's like, no, he doesn't. He doesn't say it as it is, but he comes off across like that because that is what politics is. Politics is very much about perception. It's very much about. It's like anything. It's like doing social media. Or television or anything like that. Anything where you're presenting to a load of people who do not know you personally. It's authenticity, isn't it? People think that Lee Anderson is authentic, and they don't know he's not because they don't know him, and they don't follow him closely enough to see the inconsistencies. And that's the thing. I mean, that came out. There was YouTube did this report. I may have mentioned it before. YouTube did this study on what it is that appeals to viewers, and they didn't just do surveys. They did brain scans and everything. And the big thing, one of the big things that came out of it was this sort of sense of authenticity. Do people believe that the person they're watching is being authentic? And you know, some people can appear authentic when they're absolutely not, and there are some people who are authentic and they don't come across it because they might come across a bit too awkward and people will think they're shifty or something. So you know, perception's everything in politics. There are lots of people in politics that their supporters think they're honest and genuine, all the rest of it. And it's like, they're really not. I mean, by definition, a senior politician can't actually be totally honest anyway, because despite the fact that voters will moan about dishonesty in politics, it's like, well, they reward it. And they punish honesty a lot of the time. They punish honesty. If Labour came out, let's say Labour came out and said a few things. Let's say they said, look, the world's buggered. You know, Russia's doing a lot to bugger it up, but we've done our fair share as well. And if you bugger the world up, you are going to end up with a load of refugees. And we don't take that many, but we are going to have to take our fair share. You know, we need to set up these safe asylum routes, for example. And in actual fact, to power our economy, we're going to need immigrants and things like that. They could come out and say that. They could be completely honest about every aspect of immigration and say this is what we're going to do and so on. And they would be punished for it at the ballot box. They could come out and say about Brexit, it's absolute disaster area being outside the single market and the customs union. We're losing 50. I mean, they could, instead of going on about the £22 billion black hole, Labour could easily have come out and said, talked about the £50 billion black hole. In fact, they could have, they could have said the Tories left them a roughly £70 billion black hole. They could have said about £20 billion worth where they just, you know, ignored some figures on the balance sheet, and £50 billion a year, not a one-off, a year, because of lost tax revenues because of the trade barriers they raised with Brexit. Labour could come out and say that, and when someone said, oh, should we go back into the EU? They said, no, we can't, take too long. They could say, we can ask, we can start accession talks, but we can't do it. They'd be punished for that in the ballot box as well, because they would be highlighting a problem and at the same time saying, but there's nothing we can really do about it in the short term. And again, it goes back to that comment about how impatient voters are these days. Voters are very, very impatient. They really expect instant results. So as soon as you highlight a problem as a government, you'd better have a solution that will do the job before the next election. And if you don't, that's when politicians have to sort of, at the very least, not say anything. You know, this is why the difference between what I call political honesty. I think political honesty is not telling the truth. It's doing what you say you will do, which is different. I only know people who laugh at Anderson. Oh, he is an absolute clown. Honestly, he is a clown. But the people who think he speaks for them, and there are a lot of people like that. Authentically stupid. Oh well, everyone loves a trier. Oh, everyone feels sorry. Yeah, Tim nice but dim. Oh, everyone falls for a character like that. Yeah, definitely. What was their perception of me, Phil? Oh, you, Phil. I don't know. They? I don't know. A lie is like a painkiller. It provides instant relief but has lasting side effects. Truth is like surgery. Hurts, but everyone eventually cures. Yes. The problem is, however, that what happens is you lose the election. If you're too honest about certain things. I mean, you know, I would welcome more honest. I think Labour are too cautious on being honest with certain things. I do think they have got the scope to be more honest on a few things, but I also understand there are other issues. It's like, yeah, it's not going to be there. Has there been any hint about reform of electricity pricing yet? Not really, no. Price effectively set as a multiple of the gas price regardless how cheap wind or solar is. Yeah. See, I mean, here's the thing, like, Labour will move away from that. If Labour do what they say, they like Ed Miliband says, by 2030, 95% of our energy is going to come from low carbon sources, right? At that point, or even before that point, that should no longer be the case. You shouldn't be basing your price on like 5% of supply. So it will just, they haven't said anything specific about it, but it will just naturally occur as they transition. The question is, can they transition as quickly as Ed Miliband is suggesting? Have I ever had a discussion with... Oh, hello. Helena from No Justice. I think so, yeah. I think I might have done that on the Sunday roast one time. Ivan Eyebrows, £5 again, thank you. It says, I know plenty of average voters, none of them like 30p. Well, again, it's like anecdotal, isn't it? It's like you'll say, I get in the comments, oh, everyone I know who voted Labour says they'll never vote Labour again. It's like, well, you may be telling the truth, you may not be. If you are telling the truth, the people who've told you may not be. And even if they are, that's just your little circle, isn't it? It's just your little circle. So David there, Starmer could move effortless into the Conservative Party. He doesn't believe in social justice. There speaks someone who has no idea what Keir Starmer did before he entered Parliament. That is an absolutely ridiculous thing to say. We're not even going to bother going over that. Anyone who reads any sort of even quick Google biography of Keir Starmer can see that's absolute nonsense. Was Lisa and Andy not simultaneously a friend of Israel, a friend of Palestine? I'm not sure, actually, but that is probably the best way to do it. I mean, given the friction around the whole issue, if you're going to be in one, you really should be in the other. I would just not be in either. Oh, did I see Lisa and Andy talking about how good YouTube was for kids? Maybe they should learn to utilise it properly themselves. Yes. Of course, they're not trying to attract kids. I mean, YouTube is, though. I mean, you know, when anyone who has their own YouTube channel will know. With content, you have to say whether or not it's for kids. And if YouTube thinks it's for kids, it's treated very, very differently to other content. I was watching... It's quite funny. So there's someone, like there's a lot of people on YouTube who, of course, will advise other people who want to get onto YouTube how to do it. I may do a channel like that myself at some point. But, although there's a few little projects I've got for this year that I want to try out first. But, I was watching this one guy and he was like putting himself to the test. He says, I'm going to show you I can grow a channel from scratch just to prove it. And I thought, well, that's a really good way to demonstrate that you know what you're talking about, isn't it? You know, you do a channel, get it to blow up instantly. The problem is, it didn't work. It sort of part proved his point, but he did it on SpongeBob SquarePants, but it wasn't aimed at children. It was aimed at adult fans. But by his second video, it was getting flagged as for children. So it completely buggered his whole project up, and yet he still produced the video anyway. And I thought, mate, if you really knew how to create a channel and do well with it, you would just have abandoned that one and do something else, because that hasn't worked. It hasn't worked. It hasn't met your aims. But the point is that YouTube will look at a thing and go, we think that's for kids. They don't let people, you know, so they've got actually pretty good systems. I would say YouTube is a very, very, very good social media platform for a lot, not for everything, but for a lot of things. You know, first of all, it's very good for creators because, you know, you can monetize it. You can't really monetize any other platform directly. I mean, I suppose Twitter allows you to have like memberships now, doesn't it? But there's none of that. But with YouTube, you can just monetize based on views. You don't need, I use members as well, but you don't need that. It's because of the adpocalypse some years ago where it got into a lot of trouble because basically the British media, its competitors were, and then American media after it, really hammered them over the idea that there would be ads in like videos glorifying terrorism. So you know, it's like, there's this video glorifying terrorism and it's advertising Pepsi on it. So there was a huge hoo-ha. So their systems are actually really good. They've got very good systems in to the point where YouTube sort of knows what your video's about. I mean, there's still things you should do, like give it a good description and a title and things like that. But YouTube knows what the video's about. By and large, I mean, it's not perfect, but it's very, very good. And it can target it to the people who are more likely to be interested in it. What's my favourite policies that Labour have put forward so far? I keep saying my absolute favourite. I'm going to go into the losers before we finish, actually. No, it's got rid of me. Let's get rid of them. My absolute favourite are the ones related to water companies, because not only do I think they will work, but I think you can apply them. I don't know that Labour have got plans to do this, but there's no reason why you couldn't apply them to lots of other public bodies as well. And the specific policies I'm thinking of are, if you keep breaking the law, you're going to go to prison. Because at the moment, water company breaks the law, what happens? Initially, they may get a telling off, which is fine if it's a one-off. If it's not, then they can get fined, and then they might get a bigger fine. But then they just go, well, we're just going to, oh, we're getting fined all this money. We better charge our customers more so we can pay for it. So a fine becomes a business expense because they're not a proper business. Like a proper business that has to sell privately to customers can't just keep whacking up its prices if it's getting fined. Like if you're a restaurant, say, and you keep having the health inspector fine you, I don't know, I think they just shut you down, I don't know. But let's say they fine you for certain violations. They can't just keep whacking up the prices to pay for the fines because the customers won't pay it, especially if they find out why you're being fined. Whereas water, you have to have water, so you just have to pay it. There's no choice in the matter. You can't even go to a different water company because that's not a thing. So the idea of, first of all, ring fencing it so that you can't actually use customer money to pay the fines effectively. It's going to come out of your dividends and bonuses first. But then the idea that it's not just the water company, which isn't a person that is responsible for the law, that it's actual individuals, the actual executives. And if they repeatedly break the law, then there are various actions which can include imprisonment in the legislation. I mean, this would be, I don't imagine any executives going to go to prison because they'll behave themselves. But, and that sort of thing, you can apply it to so many other things. You can apply it to the media. I would like to see it applied to the media. You have a duty of accuracy, which doesn't mean that if you get found out publishing something that's wrong, that you go to prison. I'm not suggesting that. Mistakes can happen. But there needs to be a clearly defined code of conduct that says, and because proper journalists know how to verify sources anyway. Yes, you can get caught out. Yeah, you can get something wrong. Heat of the moment. I'm not suggesting we penalise people for that. But if you are going to be publishing something that is provably wrong, or that you have not gone to reasonable lengths to verify the accuracy of, that's against the law. And if you keep doing it, then there should be prison for that. Sam Woodson, £10, thank you. It says, how do Labour cartoonise and simplify their message for those who aren't interested in politics? Go onto social media, get people who know how to do that. There are lots of people who already have those skills that are Labour supporters. They're a huge political party. They've got their supporters. Utilise them. And they're not doing. I mean, yes, it would be better if they did their own thing. I think they should do their own thing and they should employ people to do it. And it will be self-funding, completely self-funding. Because like I say, I mean, if you look at the Keir Starmer Labour channel, I don't think they monetise it. But if they did something engaging, they could, and then it would pay for itself. As well as be a good way to generate just general donations. They'd make way more money than I would. And I can manage on it. So, and you only need really a couple of people. I think you just need a couple of people. And you wouldn't do content like I do it. You would do it more like Jimmy the Giant, I would imagine. So you do like big pieces. You could do a few small bits as well. But I think big pieces every week or two, a few times a month. And then some smaller bits in between maybe. And you only need two types of person to do it. You need someone who's good at the technical side of it. So good at making it look. Now, in terms of making it look good on YouTube, it's really important to distinguish here. That doesn't mean corporate. That's the problem with Labour's stuff at the moment and Keir Starmer's stuff on the channel. It's all too corporate. It breaks that authenticity issue. It doesn't look authentic. It looks staged because it is. And it's obviously staged. Now, obviously, you do stage things. I stage my videos. I script them and stand in front of a camera and then read off the script, right? Occasionally doing a bit of ad-libbing. But that's what I would do. So you need someone who's good at the technical side of it, who can make it look right, design good thumbnails, stuff like that. And then you need someone else who's good at knowing what the public are interested in, and like that communication. You need the communicator and the technical person. Two people, and you know what? They could produce content across all social media platforms, and it would pay for itself. You would focus on YouTube for two reasons. First of all, do you know what? There's a lot of Labour's key target voters on YouTube. Twitter is where all the political activists live. So you've got, and you do have experts there as well. I'm not saying it's only political activists, but that's where, you know, when you've got a following on Twitter or something like that, they're very politically engaged people. You don't have the ordinary members of the public on Twitter are just looking at cat pictures, not politics, right? Whereas on YouTube, that's different. But anyway, let's quickly go over losers because we're sort of running out of time, but we don't have to finish exactly on time. So now I put a poll up on the channel a bit earlier this afternoon. There may be other losers you think as well, but I thought these three all lost in different ways. So it's quite interesting. Liz Truss lost because she lost her seat, and she would have expected to have, I don't think she would have necessarily expected to lead the Conservatives again, although I don't know, she might. But I did think she expected to give a steer to the Conservatives in this Parliament, in opposition. And now she's not an MP. She can't do that unless she somehow gets herself back. But at the same time, she's still finding work. The IEA are still supporting her for some reason. So she's going around doing speeches and stuff like that. So I assume she's making money. But nonetheless, she runs the risk of becoming politically irrelevant, you know, if she carries on. The next one's Suella Braverman. So she kept her seat, but she is irrelevant. And I mentioned this with Graham's stream last week. Earlier this month, she writes for the Telegraph. Now, usually, because I browse various social media, I browse like Twitter particularly quite a lot, even these days. And so when a senior politician writes an article, someone's going to post it, and someone I follow is probably going to post it. I'll become aware of it. I'll see it. So if any senior politician writes an article, and that includes people even like David Frost, if they write an article, it's probably going to appear in my feed. So I become aware of it that way. So earlier this month, at the start of the month, Suella Braverman wrote a piece for the article, Telegraph. I can't remember what it was called even. I only came across it by browsing the Telegraph. I didn't see anyone posting it on social media. It didn't come up on my feed at all. And that to me suggests that she's now irrelevant. She shit the bed with the Conservatives. That's why she couldn't even get on the ground floor in the leadership contest. It was quite obvious she wanted to replace Rishi Sunak. She couldn't even get the 10 MPs to sponsor her. So she was not in the contest. She's now mulling over defecting to Reform UK. Her husband has already defected. It's clear to me that she's trying to work out, can she still be a Reform MP after the next election? So I think she's trying to weigh up her options here. She wouldn't win her own seat with Reform UK, but she'd have to move somewhere. But she has definitely lost, because a year ago, she will have thought that she had a realistic crack at becoming Conservative leader. And now she's basically Andrew Bridgen. Everyone's ignoring her. Then Jonathan Gullis lost. He lost in two ways. He's not an MP and he can't get a job. He's still whining right now. Just before Christmas, I think, he was still whining that he can't get a job. Now, I would argue, and I've said this before, it's because he's looking for teaching jobs, and you can't just get a teaching job. There are certain times of year where you are more likely to get one. even though there are shortages. So I suppose in theory, any time of year it is possible to get one. But that's really why. But it's, you know, it's quite funny. Jonathan Gullis properly lost, didn't he? If he is still looking for a teaching job after 5 years of being, let's face it, a famous Tory MP, if he couldn't use that position to wangle himself some nice little job, like Dominic Raab's gone off to earn, you know, 100 grand a year plus, which, okay, might be small change for him. But it's a, you know, you can live on it. He can live on it even. Jonathan Gullis can't even get a teaching job. But interesting. So I did ask on you know, the thing, who people thought was the biggest loser of 2024. Now, I am going to say in the comments, there were a lot of people saying the British public for various reasons. Some people say, I mean, first of all, I'm not going to open it out to a whole group of people. I'm trying to make it specific people. But some people were saying the British public because Labour are now in power. They're obviously not fans of Labour. And some people said the British public because they'd suffered from 14 years of the Conservatives, which is interesting. But in terms of those three, Liz Truss, by far and away, people think is the biggest loser, which I think is interesting. 63% think Liz Truss. Let me just refresh it, just to make sure this is bang up to date. 63% Liz Truss, 16% Suella Braverman, 14% Jonathan Gullis, and 8% other. Because I gave another as well. So even if there was one other that a lot of people agreed with in the comments, Liz Truss beats it. Now, I was surprised about that because of all of them, those three, I would say, ironically, she's lost the least because the IEA are still promoting her. So she is, I don't know what she's getting paid because she doesn't have to declare it now. She's not an MP. But she's getting work. She must be getting paid for doing all these tours and stuff. So she's getting money. She's retaining a little bit of relevance. I mean, when was the last time I really talked about Suella Braverman in a video? It's a long time ago. She's irrelevant now. Jonathan Gullis, same thing. But every now and then I do a video on Liz Truss, so she's maintaining some relevance. I'm not doing it just for fun. I do make fun of her when I talk about her, but I'm not doing it just for that. She is relevant still. And she might come back to Parliament. So I'm not. It's actually weird that people thought that she is the big loser. Because I would say, I'm not sure between Braverman and Gullis. Gullis, I suppose, I would probably have picked because if he needs a teaching job, he doesn't think he's set for life. Put it that way. There was a lot of people trying to claim that he was worth like 5 million quid or something. I don't know where this comes from. But he was working as a teacher before he entered Parliament. So if he was worth 5 million quid, he's embezzled it somehow. Or he's obtained corruptly because he never got paid that much as an MP, even in terms of side jobs. But I don't think he is. If you were worth 5 million quid, you're not scratching around. You're not filling out 100 applications to work as a teacher again, are you? We need another John Prescott to steer the party towards people. I think no. I again, this. If you look at what Labour are doing, I know, like, Starmer's not coming across as the best, but if you look at what's going on, it's very much like it is very much aimed at people. Improving people's pay, improving people's access to NHS, actually focusing on transport. They're actually doing a lot of what the last Labour government did and more as well. And also, I think Angela Rayner is a very John Prescott. I don't expect her to punch anyone. More's the pity. You say Andy Burnham would make an excellent Labour leader. No, he's a bit of a snake, is old Andy. He's doing a good job as Mayor of Manchester. Let him carry on with that. He's doing well there. I do find it interesting, though, that you do get a lot of like Corbynites who would like Andy Burnham, and you're thinking, it's not what you said about him when he was running for leadership, was it? You didn't want the Blairite in power then, did you? But anyway, Gullis could be Lee Anderson's bag carrier. Well, I'll tell you what I do think. I think it must be eating Jonathan Gullis up, because there was like a trio, weren't there? There was like the three amigos of Brexit in the last Parliament. You had Brenda Clark-Smith, you had Jonathan C. Gullis, and Leanderthal, right? I know I'm very mature. All of them 2090 entries who all made a name for themselves by being obnoxiously pro-Brexit and pro-culture war and all the rest of it. They were like three peas in a pod, weren't they? And yet, I don't know what's happened to Brendan Clark-Smith. He's not whining about not being able to get a job, though. Jonathan Gullis has lost his seat as well, but he can't get a job. And they're the posh ones. Like, Jonathan Gullis was privately educated. So he is a typical Tory. Privately educated, very entitled, although he did have an ordinary job. So he didn't really leverage that private education for anything grander. Whereas Lee Anderson, he's the sort of person they look down their noses at. He's an ex-miner, poor. Well, he was poor, not so much anymore, but he was poor. And yet, look at him. He's still an MP, so he's still getting plenty of money. I don't know. Did I miss a comment? Does he still work if he still works for GB News, he's getting lots of money. Loads of money, in fact. But there it is. There was some mention of Jimmy Carter there, yes. R.I.P. Someone did say America needs another Jimmy Carter. Now, here's my view of Jimmy Carter. He was probably, in terms of the character of him, was probably the best president the United States has had, in my not very expert historical opinion. But the more you read about him, or the more you learn about him, you just think, this is like the nicest guy. This is like having Gandhi as the president of the United States. However, strategy. He lost, didn't he? After the first term. He couldn't convert it into a second term. And as a result of that, allowed in Reaganism, which did an awful lot of damage. And again, just like I would say, even though Margaret Thatcher would, if zombie Thatcher were about, she would have destroyed Nigel Farage, Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg, the lot of them for what they've done. But all of those people are they're a consequence of a natural trajectory of Thatcherism. And I would say the same with Trump. Ronald Reagan, I'm sure, would absolutely hate Trump's guts. But Trump is a product of that Reagan trajectory. And, if Reagan had have lost, he's unlikely to have been the candidate for the Republicans at the next election because he's a loser, right? That would have been that. And hopefully would never have had Reaganism or anything like it again. So, and that is the consequence of losing. So I actually don't think the US needs another Jimmy Carter, because it's only a sentiment to have, I think, if they can also win elections. If they can't win elections, so they're actually better off with another Obama, someone who will, inexperience, I think, stopped him doing a lot more, but someone who wants to do good things, but also knows how to win elections. Say Gandhi would nuke everyone. No, he wouldn't. He would do the opposite. Someone there saying he's too nice for politics. Yes, possibly. But I mean, again, it's hard for me to say you can be too nice for politics, but I think you can be not sufficiently ruthlessly focused on strategy. Like one of the things Carter did, for example, with his secretaries of state, he wouldn't allow them to go around in chauffeur-driven cars, which sounds really good man of the people stuff. But then you realise if they have to get themselves around, that cuts, a minister or a secretary of state or whatever in a chauffeur-driven car, they're in the back, they're working. While they've been driven around, they're working. Right? And America's a big old place. There's a lot of driving around to be done. So they are working. So if you make them drive themselves around, then they're not working while they're driving. And because of that, they were just less efficient. So it was a silly policy, really, because it costs nothing. It's really just for show. And it might have been well intentioned, but it weakened his government. It was and you have to be really careful about that. You can't just for the sake of showing solidarity with people, you can't weaken your government. But anyway, if only Trump had been born in Scotland. It'd be a bit mean to inflict him upon the Scottish, wouldn't it? He came over anyway to build a golf course. A young Joe Biden figure would do. Yeah, I mean, Biden, unfortunately, ended up getting his shot far too late. Yeah, Biden 20 years ago could have been useful, but, again. Tis what it is. Say Thatcher should have been cut short after the Falklands. Well, bizarrely enough, the Falklands actually embellished her reputation. If it hadn't been for the Falklands, it doesn't mean to say she would have lost. But, when people sort of say at the moment, oh, Keir Starmer's popularity has dropped, it's never been like this, this is unprecedented. It's like, it's not at all. Margaret Thatcher's popularity properly plummeted to the same levels when she first became Prime Minister. But she was let off the hook by the Falklands and also a Labour Party that was not ruthlessly focused on winning an election. And that's, you have to have that. That has to be the top priority. I'll sort of have to leave it here because we've sort of run out of time. But that for me would have to be the top priority. And it has to be the top priority next year. And here's what I think. I think Starmer is very, very ruthlessly focused on his job in government. I think he's one of the most serious people running a government I've seen in this country. It's just that he doesn't take politics seriously enough. That's my issue there. That is my issue. But we will have to leave it there. Have a very happy New Year, everyone. We will be back to normal schedules after today. So it'll be like, Saturday stream public, but, members in the chat and stuff like that. Every now and then on special occasions, we'll do things like this. And we'll see it here. But last one there, Michael saying, where do the Conservatives go from here, Phil, with or without reform? What they need to do, your first step in rebuilding, is you have to be honest with yourselves about what really went wrong. Now, for all I know, that's happening. I strongly suspect it's not happening, though. But you have to approach the public. You have to go to the pub. The public have kicked you out because they blame you for something. And in actual fact, in this particular case, I would say there are things the Conservatives should absolutely take the blame for. But it doesn't matter whether you think it's fair or not. I would say in 2010, they kicked Labour out when Labour had actually done very well. They just kicked them out for the banking crisis, which was like, bankers' fault. The only thing Labour did wrong was not put them in prison for it. Or the ones chiefly responsible. I don't mean all bankers. But you still have to be able to go to the public and say, we let you down in some way. In some way, you have to be able to say to the public, yeah, we got that wrong. Now, it's a tricky thing. But if you don't do that, you can't even start to rebuild trust with the public. And the thing is now, like the Conservatives are behaving, and I think Labour as well, I think where Labour and the Conservatives are both going wrong, they're both behaving as if each of them is the other's alternative. So the Conservatives are behaving as well, if Labour carry on being unpopular, then voters will switch back to us. And Labour are thinking, well, as long as the Conservatives carry on being shit, then we'll still win the next election. And it's like they're both forgetting about Reform UK. And I know I keep saying that Reform UK are not going to win the next election. But that's because I think at least Labour are going to deliver and take the next election seriously. But they are still not treating them as seriously as they should. But anyway, there it is. If you are in a country that has just ticked over the new year, Happy New Year. If not, then Happy New Year later. Thanks for coming on, everyone. Have a brilliant rest of year. And until next year, I'll see you later.